for doing my show. I think you're the first female guest I've had on here, so it's great to have you.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I haven't done that many episodes yet. I invited a couple others, but they're in the scheduling. But I checked out some of your stuff, and you seem pretty eloquent. So it seems like there's a number of authors who they put out stories, but they don't have nearly as much of like a wide script to draw from. So I appreciate your stuff.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
What you started in writing and getting like fantasy projects or sci-fi projects out there? I know you do some historical fiction as well.
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in history and mythology since I was a little kid, and I got this big book of Greek myths or something. And among my friends group, I was always the storyteller, the one who would come up with ideas for what we were going to play. Our Barbie dolls and little toy animals always had some pretty messed up adventures. As for being a writer, again, even as a kid, when I was in school and we were supposed to be doing journal writings about how we spent our weekend or whatever, I'd be wanting to write stories instead. So I guess it's just always been part of part of my personality.
Okay, did you see any outlet for that in high school, like creative writing classes or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I most of the way through high school, my plan was that I would go to college, major in English, become a teacher, and write on the side. The usual career path. But then the last half of my senior year, I took a course in humanology and psychology and wound up thinking that would be a more interesting major. So I wound up not majoring in English, but I did take every creative writing class I could get my hands on. In high school, my teacher thought I was a little strange because I was writing about vampires and werewolves and a Girl Scout troop leader who teaches all her girls how to join a cult, you know, stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I got kicked out of a creative writing class for only writing horror.
yeah.
So you had negative feedback, or they just thought it was like not their dynamic?
And it was like, this is well written, but when are you going to write something normal or something nice? And I still get that, actually.
What was it like? This is fluid. This is well spoken, well alliterated, but it's not quite the subject matter I would choose. Was it
Yeah, yeah,
like?
a little too violent, too gory.
So, did you eventually go to college and got a psychology degree?
I did, yes. I majored in psychology and then would spend the next 30 years working in the residential psychiatric field, which is basically a halfway house for people that are between being hospitalized and being able to live on their own, helping them to manage their own medications, take care of their own daily living skills, deal with their symptoms, and things like that.
Were there people who were like way more extreme? I'm not talking like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer extreme, but were there people that were way more extreme and people that
Um,
were like kind of normal? They just needed a little bit of help.
yeah, we saw all kinds. A lot of severe delusions, bipolar, manic mood swings. Um, I lucked out. In all those 30 years, I never had any really dangerous encounters, but I knew other staff people who did. So it basically it got me used to being kind of ready for anything because you never know what sort of wild stuff you're going to hear on any given night.
Have you seen stuff like the series Stranger Things?
Oh yeah, yeah. I watched all of Stranger Things.
Wait, was any of that like they were all? I wouldn't say that they were necessarily mental health, um, patients or whatever, but they all had like various things going on. Was that anything like the
Yeah.
institute you worked at?
I our facilities, the facilities I worked at, didn't treat kids. It was for adults. So none of that. More of what I got from Stranger Things was that I was a gamer D&D nerd in the 80s. So that was that was all just right there for me, you know. It's like I knew those kids. I was those kids.
Well, I remember those. I grew up with them as well, but I also live in New York, and that's kind of loosely based off the Montauk Project, which is right here in New York.
Oh yeah.
So, and I have absolutely no doubt that the government probably did something vaguely like that because they've done plenty of other things vaguely. But did you get inspiration for your stories from what you were encountering in your professional psychology field?
Oh yeah, a lot of little anecdotes and quotes from residents have made their way into my work. In my book Trenchmouth, I was writing it while I was at on the job because I worked the overnight shift. So in the downtime, I would write on the company clock. And there was one resident, kid named TJ, who was just so excited to know a real writer, and he wanted to know if he could be in the book. And so I made him a character in the book. And every night I'd come in and he would ask how it was going, and I'd tell him what his character was up to, and it's like, all right, you're piloting this boat, and then you're gonna get attacked by a giant squid, okay? And he's like, yeah. so
But
so yeah.
that's probably a huge throw up for him.
Yeah.
Did he was he more of like a observer to everything? He wasn't really like one of the people that was kind of outrageous.
Yeah, he was pretty well together. He just needed help. I mean, he couldn't cook or clean or do those. He had no basic adult daily living skills, so he needed someone to help make sure that he knew how to do his laundry and all that. He moved on before I left that job, so he wasn't there long. But yeah, he was a good guy.
Yeah, nice. How old was he?
Like early 20s. He was one of our younger folks.
Okay. And I've noticed, like, when I was, I listened to audiobooks and some of your stuff, and it seems like you have a fairly extensive vocabulary. And I find that sometimes when I'll write something, I actually have to dumb it down a little bit because I'm like, nobody's going to know what that word means. Do you find yourself doing that at all?
It depends on the book. And yeah, I love language. Language is my play-doh, is how I think of it. You can make anything out of it. And to this day, I love it that when I come across a word or a term in somebody else's book that I don't know, it's like, oh, cool. I actually learned something today. That's a good one. I'm going to have to remember that. But for me, it's mostly about keeping the language and the vocabulary level to fit with the genre and the setting and the characters.
Right. I noticed you did that well. I noticed that there was
Yeah.
one book that I was checking out your work on where like they were on a ship and then one of the guys was speaking in a British accent and it seemed like the way he was describing stuff would go with that character. Like it seemed to flow naturally. I thought that was a great thing.
Yeah, that's really important to me, especially with kid characters, because I see so many child characters in fiction that don't seem like children at all. And I'm like wondering if the author is like Have you never
Right.
talked to a kid, spent time with a kid? Were you ever a kid? They think and express themselves very differently than an adult does. And so I tend to write a lot of children in my stories, and it's really important to me to make them seem like genuine children.
No, I think that's a very good point. I
Yeah.
wrote a short story that takes place in the trenches of World War I, and the guy's writing back to his loved one home, and somebody critiqued it, and they said, "Yeah, I like it, but that doesn't sound like time period letters." I was like, "Uh oh."
Right.
So then I look up letters from that time period to see exactly how they communicated to make it sound more authentic. But yeah, no, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, well, and I do a lot of historical stuff too, and it always, again, that's very important to me. If I'm writing a Viking story, the language and the cadence and the vocabulary and the terminology is going to be very different from when I'm writing a Western.
Okay.
They have to sound right. They have to feel right.
Right.
And then I do a lot of editing and proofreading for other authors as well. And so that's something that I've become sensitive to. If they're writing something set in a different era, I'm always on the lookout for anachronisms, things that don't fit. I remember once years ago in a book about King Arthur, they used okay. And it was like, nope, nope,
Yeah.
nope, that broke it right there. It's like, King Arthur does not ask Guinevere if she's okay. So, and I know it can be nitpicky, but if it breaks the mood of the story,
No,
then
nitpicking
that I
makes
don't want to do that.
yeah, no, that nitpicking makes it like that. That's a very crucial point to it, and like I find that often when I'll see something like I do a lot of art, and when I see somebody that like they didn't follow the anatomy, so it's a beautiful painting, but some of the anatomy's a little bit off, it ruins the entire thing for me. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing with writing. If one thing seems totally unbelievable or out of place or like you're experienced with something and obviously the writer is not, then it ruins it for you.
Yeah, I gave up on reading a otherwise perfectly good werewolf book because the phases of the moon were all screwed up.
Yeah,
It was like the full moon does not rise at midnight. That's not the way it works. Look at an Earth Moon Sun diagram for God's sake. You know,
that's,
so you
it,
never can tell what's gonna
I
trip you up.
remember Neil
But
deGrasse Tyson. He was on Joe Rogan. He was talking about this, and he said he watched the Titanic, and like Leonardo DiCaprio is looking at the sky, and like the stars were not aligned for when that was.
oh,
DeGrasse Tyson wrote him something, and he never responded. But they ran into him at the party, and James Cameron's like, "I heard you have something to tell me about the sky." Yeah.
yeah, it's like in April or whatever, those constellations wouldn't be there. Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes it, and I feel like it's almost like you don't really notice it when an author like when they're very fluid, everything seems time and place. You don't necessarily notice that they put all the structural elements into it. It just makes it read more smoothly, and you're like, oh, it's a well told story. Whereas
Yeah,
the flaws make it stand out immediately.
yeah. Well, and again, with the editing, I work with a lot of younger writers who grew up with the internet and with cell phones and all that. And some of them have written stories like set in the 80s. And I'm like, I hate to break it to you, but
I was alive then, and that didn't really happen.
yeah. Or they'll be using contemporary slang,
Uh-huh.
and other terms. It's like, we
Talk like
no,
that.
no nobody talked like that. Sorry, but
Yeah,
yeah.
there's like, and there are some people I noticed this too. Like when they start out, they're like a little bit stiffer. They kind of have to like develop their style. But
Yeah.
like I think Neil Gaiman's like that. Like he had some great ideas when he started out, but his writing was like a little bit more. It wasn't stiff like it's like blocky. Like what is this? It was just like you're like okay, but I think now he's become so fluid that he could write about almost anything, and you'd be like, oh, I want to check that out. I want to see what's going on there.
Yeah, yeah. And it builds up a level of trust too. It's like at this point in his career, anything he does, we know we can trust him to tell a damn good story.
Oh yeah, definitely. Have you noticed it by editing other people's stuff? It helps you. It helps you like keep track of what you're doing and look out for like little flaws that might otherwise fly by you.
Oh yeah, it all helps. It all works together. I can, if I see something that someone is doing and it bothers me, and then I catch myself doing it, it's like, oh wait, no,
Right.
gotta fix
You look
that. Yeah,
at say,
yeah,
man, I've already seen that. Yeah.
yeah. But and then it goes both ways because then I can go to the other author and say, look, I used to do that, and here's how it kept messing me up. So here's what I did to try and get around it. Maybe you might try that.
Right. No, I find like I apprentice other authors and or other artists, and when I apprentice the artists, like by them making mistakes and me correcting it, it also keeps in mind for me to look out for that, like for
Yeah.
anatomy and for perspective and light source and all that sort of stuff. I do find like I do a bunch of different hobbies. So I don't feel fulfilled unless I like devote a little bit of time to all of them. Like artwork and writing. I also do MMA. Do you find the same thing going on for you? Do you have like a like if you don't do editing, if you just write for a while, you're like I need to do a little bit more editing.
Yeah, and then I have other weirdo interests. I do strange crafts. I modify Barbie dolls, for instance, into characters from movies or TV shows or other authors' books.
Is
Um,
it for you, or do you sell like on Etsy or anything like that?
Mostly, well, I started out doing them for me. I've sold some, I've done a bunch for gifts. My most recent, I don't know if I can, you can't really see them very well, but behind me on that white shelf,
Right.
um, I've got the main characters of The Boys
Okay. Yeah.
all done as
Great show. I love that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And or a friend of mine was selling a giant alien queen, so it was like, well, she needs a Ripley and holding a newt with a gun to go with her, so but yeah, every now and then it's like, all right, I still need to create something,
Okay.
but maybe let's work with paint and the glue gun instead of words for a while. Or baking. I not so much these days, but when I was living in Portland, and we would have the Portland Bizarro writers meetings every month, I would always bring some sort of cake or cupcakes or cookies,
When
sometimes themed for people's book release parties, fun stuff like that.
when did you live in Portland?
I was in Portland until a year ago last April.
Okay. Where do you live now?
I'm currently living in La Mirada, California. I quit my job in Portland and moved down here to become my mother's full-time live-in caretaker.
Okay.
So right now I'm in the house that my grandparents bought as a brand new housing development in 1960.
Did you like it better in Portland or you like it better in California?
Well, I would normally say that it's too hot down here, but right now it's hotter in Portland than it is here in LA. So, but it was a big change because I went from working the overnight shift in Portland to trying to live in a daytime schedule in Southern California. And I'm still not used to this much sunlight. Like the first time I was actually out in the sun for any length of time, I got a second-degree burn on my shoulder. I was that pasty. It's like I am not used to this.
Yeah, I'm not a son like I either. I get up late and I stay up late. So,
Yeah.
but so right now, what is your primary focus? Is it writing?
Yeah, well, it's taking care of mom.
Right.
Um, and then I write, again, it's like when I was working in the residential facility during the downtime when she doesn't need anything, I can write or focus on other stuff. But I never know what kind of a day she's going to have, and so I can't have any sort of specific routine
Right.
because it's not up to me. I kind of have to take it when I can get it. So yeah, at the moment it's taking care of mom, taking care of my cats, and then keeping up with writing and editing and things like that as I can.
I find that I mean, there's some people like Stephen King. They're like, you just need to sit down and write. You need to hash out this many words every single day, and you can edit it later as long as you get something down. And some people are more like, and I feel like I'm more like that. I'm like, when I'm inspired, I'll sit down and I'll put
Yeah.
something to paper. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I have never been one for the you must do so many hours or so many words a day. Um, some other writer, and I forget who, said that. All right, can I swear on this show?
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
Okay, was that writing is like a fart. If you force it, it might be shit. And so I try never to force it because I don't want it to be shit.
Right. Well, I noticed a lot of those, like the pulp writers, and I really like the pulp ideas, but they're not necessarily great writers, and they get
Yeah.
paid by the word. So you can tell that they were trying to like pad everything with as many words as humanly possible. I'm like, you did not need that many words.
Oh yeah, that's something I run into with editing a lot too. And while I'm gonna pick on NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, a little because while I think it's a great thing, I think so many people get hung up on the word count that they'll put in too much unnecessary fluff that gets in the way of the story just to make that word count.
I realize a
And
lot of people have like kind of a blind eye
yeah,
too. Like,
yeah,
when they read it, they put in more because they think that's needed to describe something. And a good editor, can narrow it down and say that tells me everything I need to know.
yeah. Well, once long ago, I edited a book that I only can think of as the elevator book because every single time the character would leave his apartment, it would describe him walking to the elevator, getting in the elevator, pushing the button, riding the elevator down, getting out of the elevator, and crossing the lobby.
Right.
And then the exact same thing on the way back.
Right.
I have no recollection of what else the book was about. It was just, if I have to read this goddamn elevator scene one more time, I'm going to throw something. It's like, we know how an elevator works.
You don't need to say it 20 times.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like in my first novel, I kept using the word ochre. Like, I like the word ochre, but I kept, like, if I hear that word one more fucking time, I'm gonna vomit. I'm like, yeah, maybe I
Yeah.
should scale back on that a little bit.
Well, we all get in phases like that too, where we'll fall in love with a particular term or something and then overuse it.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to rein that in, or sometimes it becomes your trademark. I mean, Richard Lehman used rump how many times?
Well, there are people. I like. I tend to fall more on the side of the people who love to describe stuff. Like John
Yeah,
Steinbeck is one of my huge influences, and I think he does a great job of describing what you're saying. Like I don't know if you read The Grapes of Wrath, but like you kind of feel like you're right there.
yeah,
Gas station attendant comes out and he's missing an eye and you see his veins twitching around and stuff. You're like, that you can picture right in front of you happening.
yeah, yeah. I think sometimes the temptation is to go too detailed,
Right.
Like, we don't need to know everything a character is wearing. We don't need to know exactly where all the furniture is positioned in the room,
Right. Well, I've done
Let
it too, so I definitely hear you.
yeah. But especially if it's something major or weird or important or different, then, and I love good description. It's just don't bog it down with all the eensy little details that we don't need.
What do you think about like the HP Lovecraft first person versus most people use third person? Like, do you have a preferred method or form of expression or something?
I think it all depends on the story and how the story wants to be told.
Okay.
I've done a lot of first person. I've done a lot of third person. Some characters or styles just lend themselves to it. I have a character named Matt Brimstone, PI. He's a private detective who lived in the 1930s, got sent to hell, and then brought back in the modern day. And so he's got that noir gumshoe kind of thing.
Right.
And that lends itself to first person,
Right.
and so that's how I always write a Matt story, because that's how it needs to be.
Right.
Other times I'll go third,
Story and tells a story whether it
yeah,
be in one voice or another.
yeah.
So that's like, do you advise other people when you edit their work that like maybe it would be better told in like third person or first person or so on?
I have sometimes, yeah. There have been some that I've helped people with, and I've been like, have you considered, or even switching characters? My book Birthright, when I initially wrote it, I got like 40,000 words into it, and I was struggling the whole time. And then I realized it was because I was using the wrong point of view character. It's like I was trying to write it from the viewpoint of the teenage son when I needed to be writing it from the viewpoint of his mother. So
Right.
I trashed the whole thing and started over, and it worked. But it was like I was beating my head against that book. Oh, I thought I had lost it. It was like I can't do this anymore. What's wrong with me? But yeah, I was using the wrong character, and I've had that with stories too. It's like this needs to be first person, or this needs to be from or in sometimes in present tense, which is always tricky.
Right.
You know.
What helps you decide between like because you have obviously a variety. It's not like everything is just one format,
Yeah.
one subject matter, one kind. What makes you decide? Is it you come up with good stories and whatever? What is it?
Yeah, I let the story tell me. I let the characters tell me. I operate pretty much in all ways on a very intuitive level. So if it feels right for the story, then that's what I want to go with. I love to play with points of view of, especially, I mentioned kids earlier, but you know animals, inhuman characters. I love trying to put myself into the the headspace of someone or something that doesn't exist anymore or exist at all. That's why I like some of the historical stuff, because I try and put myself in the head of someone who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago. Um, because I find it a challenge. It's like, can I tell this character's story in a way that is relatable, but is also believable, even if it's from the point of view of a giant anglerfish or a proto-human back when they first picked up rocks and sticks to kill each other. or a zombie or an elf or whatever. Can I do that, and can I make it seem plausible, believable? You know.
Do you
I'm sorry, I went off track there a little
do?
bit.
Cool. Do you do any of that, like method actors, or like I remember Rep Nero. He was a cabbie for 3 months to do research for a film, and so he'll try to immerse himself, in the environment of exactly what he's portraying.
Yeah, I try to do that. Well, within reason and my limited budget and means. Um, when I wrote Trenchmouth, which is my deep sea chompy chompy, um, I mean, I personally am terrified of the deep ocean, even the shallow ocean. I never want to go snorkeling or scuba diving, but I'm also fascinated with it. So I would watch all these documentaries, and immerse myself that way. But I would be scared out of my mind if anybody said, "Hey, you want to go dive in a shark cage?" I was like, "Nope, nope, nope, I'm good, thanks." You know, um, on family vacations, we have gone to. We did a cruise to Norway, and I remember just being. We went to the Viking ship museum, and just being able to stand there in front of these thousand and some year old ships and soak it all in, or stand there on deck seeing the fjords and the glaciers and all that, and absorbing it. Um, we did a similar trip to the Yucatan, and and yeah, being there at Chichen Itza, in Tikal, the old cities, and trying to absorb as much of it as I could.
Yeah,
Um,
you say it's pretty inspiring. I went to Machu Picchu.
yeah.
That's also pretty inspiring.
Oh yeah. And then sometimes, like when I'm working on or gearing up to work on uh, a western, then I'll sit down and watch Deadwood all over again, and to get the cadence of the language.
Right.
Um, with the Viking stuff, I'll watch Last Kingdom, or go back and read more Bernard Cornwell again. Again, to put myself in that space. That's really an important part of it for me.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't do that, and it doesn't feel authentic. Like
Yeah.
I did a story on the Loch Ness monster, which spoiler alert is an alien creature. But so I waited till I actually went to Scotland and I visited Loch Ness. So
Oh, that would be cool.
so I talked about him like going up to the Highlands and what he's seeing and all that sort of stuff. And to me, at least, that felt a lot more authentic. And I have friends in like Scotland, and they weren't correcting me, going, "Oh, wait a minute, nobody talks like that." And so that was good. But everybody runs into writer block at some point. When you get to a point where you're like not sure, like this is what I do. Like when I get to a point where I kind of know the end of the story, but I don't know the next step, the next stage on it, I'll just leave it alone and I'll go do something else. And I find that especially doing any sort of physical activity, like going for a bike ride or something, helps me think about that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I usually have two or three projects of my own going on at any given time. Plus, if I'm editing or helping someone else, so I can always move from one to the other. Or yeah, like you said, get out. And I mean, this house I'm in now has 60 years worth of pack rannery to go through. So I come from a long line of pack rats.
You haven't seen any ghosts yet in the house?
Uh, there's a yellow rocking chair in the garage that my sister and I are convinced is haunted.
So,
And that's why it's staying in the garage.
have you seen the movie The Changeling?
Yes.
So it's kind of something like that.
Yeah, I know that wheelchair scene and the ball coming down the stairs haunted me forever. Yeah, yeah.
So, do you find yourself more inspired by movies or by novels, by real events? Is it everything? Is it an amalgamation? What's going on?
Yeah, it's everything. I'm a mental pack rat too. And so I just store it all up like a squirrel with nuts for the winter.
Right, right.
And I never know, it's like that's gonna make it into a story someday.
Okay.
Or, I'm gonna have to use that or do something with that. And I leave myself little notes as well, but a lot of it is just
You write it down because
yeah.
I come up with stuff. I'm like, that would be great. I'm like, I better write it down before I forget what it was.
Yeah, yeah, I do that too.
Like I'll even be like about to doze off. And I'm like, oh, that's such a great idea. I better go find my phone and write it down in the notes.
Yeah, because I'll remember in the morning. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I find I'll be like, I had a great idea. What was it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've been there too.
Okay, so what are you working on right now? Like, what do you have going on?
Right now I am collaborating with Susan Snyder,
Nope.
who wrote Sharp Exploitation. God, I can't. She wrote the Encyclopedia of Shark Exploitation. I can't remember the exact title. Sorry, Susan. I tried. But it's she watches every bad shark movie ever, and then she writes up essays about them. So we are working together on a book that we're gonna call Nympho Shark Fuck Frenzy. And people think we're kidding, but we're not. And it's about a great white who is raised in captivity until he finds himself released into a lagoon full of great whites that have lost all their males.
And then he becomes Homelander, and then we're all screwed.
Well, it's like, and suddenly he's gone from being the only, not knowing any others of his kind, to being the only male with all these hot female sharks after him.
I wonder how much like the human attraction to the other species transfers to animals.
Well, yeah, we're gonna get some of that in there too. One of my main mentor is Edward Lee, and he keeps throwing me helpful suggestions for the shark book. He's like, you could have, sharks have two dicks. So you could have two girls doing a dual blowjob on a shark. And I'm like, do you want to come write the book with? He's like, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people are fans of Edward Lee. I've noticed, like doing this the interview series, a lot of people bring him up as like one of my biggest inspirations. And it's the same guy, so
Yeah.
that speaks volumes. That's great.
Yeah, he's fantastic, and he well, I told you about Matt Runestone. When I wrote my first Matt Runestone story, it was set in the Mephistopheles, which is Ed Lee's thing. And I wrote to him and asked if it was okay if I published it, and he said yeah. And that started our friendship and built up our relationship to the point that when he did Lucifer's Lottery,
Okay.
at the end of Lucifer's Lottery, there's this whole plot point where hell has stolen the contents of a freshwater lake from Florida and replaced it with the contents of a reservoir in hell. Okay, and then his book goes on to finish the rest of the main plot, but I went to him and I was like, can I write what happened around that lake in Florida? And he said, yeah. So I wrote Lake House Infernal. which is kind of a sequel. He basically said, he had two conditions. He said, I want to read it first, and I want to have a cameo in it.
Oh, okay.
And I was totally fine on both counts. He then did the forward for me, and the sequel, Warlock Infernal, is coming out anytime now. So he liked it well enough to let me keep playing with his toys,
No,
and it has just been the most fun I have ever had.
I know a lot of authors when their stuff's made into movies, they're like, you have to put me in there as a cameo. Like Stephen King is famous for that. He's
Yeah,
always a character in a lot of his movies. Stan Lee does it with a lot of. Well, he did. Now he.
yeah.
But he did it with a lot of Marvel movies. He had to have like a little bit in there. Um, have you thought about doing anything for the big screen or even the small screen?
Oh, I would love it, but I am nowhere near on that. Well, I don't know if I'm on that level or even where to start. I personally think Trenchmouth would make a hugely fun big budget monster movie. Um, I I don't know if I'd want to be in it. I think the closest I would come is maybe, yeah. There's a character in my splatter western, The Night Silver River Run Red, that I could see myself doing a cameo as her. I
Okay.
mean, she doesn't say anything. She spends her entire scene bound and gagged and gets her head cut off. But but that I could do that. That would be fun.
Well, it seems like Hollywood is so trepidatious with like any like spending a big budget on something that they're not sure is going to generate a huge return. It seems
Yeah,
a little bit more likely that somebody like a Netflix series like Black Mirror or something would pick it up. Like I had somebody, it was a Black Mirror type show, and they talked to me about using one of my stories for an episode. Unfortunately, it didn't happen because I'm not sitting on a pile of money. But I'm that's probably. It seems kind of like it's kind of random too. Like they just pick stuff. Like the guy did Walking Dead. Like out of nowhere, suddenly that was a huge series, and
yeah.
nobody thought that zombies would do anything. And then they kind of reignited the whole like zombie fashion, like where they came back into popularity for a while, and everybody was doing like zombie shows and zombie movies and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I do know several authors who've had things optioned and who've actually had things developed. So yeah, and sometimes it does seem kind of random, but it's always really exciting.
Right.
And there's nothing more exciting than like when you're watching Jeopardy and it comes up and you're like, oh, I know that person. When Josh Mallerman's Bird Box made it on Jeopardy, my mother thought I had lost my mind. I was like,
Well, I'm surprised too. Like I wanted to be a comic artist originally, and some of the people that I really liked, um, the guy who did The Crow, like that was on a small it was on Caliber Comics, which is like a small indie press, and then all of a sudden they
yeah,
got picked up and made into a big budget movie. Mike Mignola stuff with Hellboy got picked up and made into a big movie. So
yeah.
it is great to see that stuff. I'm like, where did that come from? Like the right time, right place? I don't know.
Yeah, so sometimes it just happens, and you know, hey, go with it. If it does, go with it.
Right, yeah. No, that's great to see. So, all right, I want to keep you here all day. But do you have anything you want to give a shout out to? Any projects you want to talk about?
Well, let's see. My most recent book was a collection called Horror Smut. I know you bring a lady on the show for the first time and it's so classy, right? I also wrote one called
No,
Sperm Jackers from Hell.
attention. That's better
You
than
know,
not grabbing your attention.
but yeah, Horror Smut just came out, and Warlock Infernal. It would have been out by now, but there were delays at the printer, so still hoping to see that one soon. Um, in 2 weeks, I will be at Killer Con in Austin, Texas.
Oh, I'll see you there. I'll be there.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, and Trenchmouth, I told my publisher that if Trenchmouth got nominated for the Splatterpunk, that I would wear the anglerfish hat to the awards ceremony. So it got nominated. I have to wear the hat. I'm gonna have to explain it at the airport. It's gonna be fun. But yeah.
No, if this episode airs before then, everybody watching will know.
Well, I haven't been shy about it. It's just like, and then my daughter asks me, "What are you gonna do if you win?" And on the one hand, I'm thinking, "Shit, have you seen who I'm up against? I'm not gonna win." And on the other, it's like, "Shit, I might have to make a speech in the anglerfish hat." So I don't know. I'm just so glad to be actually getting somewhere and seeing people for the first time in forever. That
With all the lockdowns and everything, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I've been here with mom. This trip is going to be the first time in a full year that I've had more than a few hours just for me.
No, that's great.
So yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Well, I feel like we should do like more like kind of open horror conventions, not just the ones where we're gonna sell action figures. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Wayne Simmons. He did a bunch of horror books. Then he kind of disappeared. But he ran Scardiff, which was like a horror convention in Wales, and it was awesome. And I did it, and I was like, "Oh, that's great. You doing next year?" He's like, "No, that's too much work."
No, I have known people who have run conventions, and I've been on convention committees. Um, the Disney show Gargoyles. We had a gathering of the gargoyles every year for many years back in the day, and I knew the people on the committee. I helped out, and that it was insane amounts of work and stress, and yeah, it's like I have nothing but admiration for people who can pull that off.
But
It's
I ran
nuts.
the convention for a couple of years. Yeah, it's a huge amount of work. I
Yeah.
So, all right. So, like I said, I don't want to keep you here all day. Thank you very much for doing this.
All right. Well, thank you.